Welcome back. Today's stories are about reclaiming what's rightfully yours. In one, a man inherits a farm he never wanted and faces a moral showdown with his wife over giving it to his brother. In another, a shady contractor's $120,000 extortion attempt ends up with him paying $115,000 and losing his business. And in the last, a coworker's sticky note territory grab gets a taste of their own medicine. At the end, we'll decide who made the right call, and you can vote for the most satisfying story in the comments. I want to transfer land to my brother who actually farms it. My wife says I'm sacrificing our family's future for guilt. I grew up on a farm that had been in my family for generations. Not a hobby farm, not a cute weekend property. This was a real working operation. Acres and acres of land, livestock, machinery, early mornings, late nights, mud in places you didn't know mud could get. My parents loved it. My grandparents loved it. Everyone before them had loved it too. I did not. From the time I was old enough to form opinions, farm life and I were never on speaking terms. I hated being dirty. I hated the smells. I hated the constant physical work and the way it never really stopped. Animals didn't charm me. They stressed me out. While other kids romanticized tractors and barns, I counted the days until I could leave. My parents tried to be patient about it, but it was obvious early on that I was not going to be the one carrying the torch. So when I turned 18, I left. No dramatic fight, no slammed doors. I just packed my things, moved to the city, and never looked back. I built a life I actually enjoyed. I have a career I'm proud of, a wife, 2 kids, and an urban routine that suits me perfectly. I still love my family, and I visited the farm regularly over the years, but every trip reinforced the same truth. I belonged somewhere else. 3 years ago, my mom passed away. 2 months ago, my dad died suddenly in a work accident on the farm. Losing him hit hard. No matter how different our lives were, he was still my father, and the finality of it all landed like a punch to the chest. When the dust settled, it was just me and my younger brother Tom left. Tom's everything I'm not when it comes to the farm. He stayed, he worked alongside our parents, he learned the business inside and out. He gave up opportunities elsewhere because he believed in keeping the land going. If anyone deserved the farm, it was him. That's why the meeting with the attorney blindsided both of us. When the will was read, we found out that I'd been left roughly 3/4 of the farm. Tom was left with the remaining quarter. I genuinely thought there had been a mistake. I actually said, "That can't be right," out loud. The attorney calmly confirmed that, yes, that was exactly what our father had specified. Tom looked stunned. I felt sick. I couldn't make sense of it. The only thing I could guess was that I had 2 kids and Tom didn't, but that explanation didn't really hold up since my children had their own inheritance set aside separately. Whatever the reason, this split felt deeply unfair. I'd walked away from farm life decades ago while Tom had sacrificed for it every single day. After the meeting, I pulled Tom aside and told him straight up, "This makes no sense. I don't want most of the land." He tried to brush it off, saying it was Dad's decision and that we should respect it, but I could see how uncomfortable he was. I insisted that we sort it out ourselves once everything was legally transferred. We agreed to revisit it once the estate was settled. When I told my wife Jules about all of this, I expected a conversation. What I got was an explosion. "You're just going to give it away?" she asked, staring at me like I'd announced I was quitting my job to join a circus. "I'm not giving it away," I said. "I'm giving it back to the person who actually wants it." She immediately went into numbers mode. The land was worth a fortune. Property values had skyrocketed. Even selling a portion could change our financial future. She accused me of being impulsive and sentimental and told me I was throwing away generational wealth. I tried to explain that the land was only valuable if you intended to use it. I wasn't going to farm it. I wasn't going to sell it out from under my brother. I wasn't interested in becoming a landlord to something I despised. To me, it wasn't an asset. It was a burden with a price tag attached. That didn't land. This is the fundamental disconnect. You see the land as a life, one you actively chose not to live. She sees it as a spreadsheet cell. You're not arguing about fairness, you're arguing about value systems. For you, it's values tied to purpose and sweat. For her, its value is purely financial and abstract. It's not that she's wrong, she's just looking at a different map. Jules then pivoted to the kids. "What if they want to farm someday?" she asked. "What if they want that connection?" I reminded her that our kids had grown up in the city, had zero interest in agriculture, and had never once mentioned wanting to run a farm. Still, I offered a compromise. I'd keep a quarter of the land. That way, if one of them magically decided to become a farmer someday, they'd have something. The rest would go to Tom so he could actually keep the operation alive. That suggestion only made her angrier. She accused me of valuing my brother more than our own family. She said I was letting guilt make decisions that would affect our children's future. I told her that fairness mattered to me and that I wasn't comfortable benefiting from something I had deliberately rejected my entire adult life. The conversation ended with her telling me she needed time to process things. That was days ago. She's barely spoken to me since. What makes this sting is that I don't feel conflicted about the land itself. I feel conflicted about how quickly money changed the tone of the conversation. I grew up watching my parents work themselves to the bone on that farm, and I watched my brother choose it over everything else. I walked away and built a different life, and I've never regretted that choice. Keeping most of the farm feels wrong, full stop. Tom hasn't pressured me. If anything, he's been careful not to. He told me he'd accept whatever I decided, but I can see how much the uncertainty weighs on him. The land isn't an investment to him, it's his life. Meanwhile, Jules sees dollar signs and future security slipping through her fingers. I understand where she's coming from, but I can't shake the feeling that turning my brother into collateral damage for a what-if scenario would be worse. At the end of the day, I don't want to own something I hated just because it's valuable. I don't want to profit off a life I refuse to live. And I definitely don't want to look my brother in the eye years from now knowing I kept most of the farm simply because I could. If that makes me stubborn, so be it. I left the farm once already. I'm not about to let it trap me again, this time with paperwork instead of fences. And our second story. I turned my coworker's passive-aggressive sticky notes against her. Night shift has its own unspoken rules. Anyone who's worked it knows once the building quiets down and the lights dim, things run on vibes, habits, and mutual courtesy. From about 1 a.m. to 6 a.m., there's usually nothing happening that requires constant attention. Most of us stack our breaks and try to grab some sleep. Nobody makes a big deal out of it. You just check in with your coworkers, quietly claim a spot, and everyone figures it out like adults. Except for this one coworker. I normally work nights with the same small rotation of people, so we all know each other's patterns. One person naps in their car, one uses an empty office, another crashes in the storage room with a blanket they keep in their locker. I've always used the break room, not because it's special, but because it's comfortable, dark, and close enough that I can hear the radio if something goes sideways. This coworker, though, decided they were above the whole communicate with your team thing. Instead of asking or even giving a heads up, the very first thing they'd do when they clocked in was slap a sticky note on the break room door. No greeting, no conversation, just a neon yellow post-it that said something like, "On break, do not enter." That was it. Room claimed, no discussion. The first time it happened, I shrugged it off. Maybe they were having a rough night. Maybe they didn't realize that wasn't how we usually did things. I found another spot, curled up in a chair that barely reclined, and tried to sleep while my neck protested the entire time. Then it happened again, and again. Every single night we worked together, there it was, the sticky note. Same handwriting, same entitlement. It didn't matter who else was on shift or whether someone had already mentioned needing the room. They just showed up, slapped their note on the door, and disappeared inside like they'd planted a flag. I tried to be reasonable at first. I mentioned casually, "Hey, next time maybe we can coordinate breaks so everyone's comfortable." They nodded, smiled, and did the exact same thing the following shift. After a while, I stopped saying anything. I just got more and more annoyed while dragging myself to increasingly bizarre nap locations. I've slept on the floor of an unused office, in a chair wedged between filing cabinets, and once in my car with the heater blasting because it was freezing outside. Meanwhile, Sticky Note was living the dream in the break room every time. After a few months of this, something in me snapped. Not in a dramatic way, just in that quiet, simmering way where your brain goes, "Oh, I see, we're doing this now." If they were going to claim the room without talking to anyone, then fine, I could play that game too. So one night, I started coming in 30 minutes early. Not because I needed to, not because work required it, but because I wanted to. I walked in, clocked in early, grabbed a sticky note from the supply drawer, and carefully wrote the exact same message they always did. Same wording, same aggressive politeness. On break, do not enter. I stuck it right on the break room door and went inside. I didn't even feel guilty. I felt calm, centered, like the universe had finally aligned. This is the moment of perfect clarity. You stop trying to reason with someone who refused to cooperate and instead adopted their own language, literally. You didn't break the system. You simply learned to speak their dialect fluently. That feeling of calm isn't just relief, it's the power of a strategy finally clicking into place. I settled into my usual spot, turned off the lights, and went to sleep. And let me tell you, that nap was phenomenal. Deep, uninterrupted, borderline spiritual. About half an hour later, I heard footsteps outside the door, then silence, then the unmistakable sound of someone peeling a sticky note off the pad and stopping. I could picture it perfectly without seeing it, them standing there, note in hand, realizing the room was already claimed. They didn't knock, they didn't say anything. They just stood there for a moment and then walked away. I smiled into my blanket. From that night on, every time I saw that coworker's name on the schedule, I showed up early. Always 30 minutes, always enough time to beat them to the punch. I wrote the note carefully every time, matching their style so closely that it felt like performance art. Same color sticky note, same phrasing, same placement on the door. They never confronted me, not once. Instead, I got to watch the silent dance play out over and over. They'd come in, coffee in hand, sticky note ready, and then stop dead in their tracks when they saw my note already there. No argument, no complaint to management, just a tight jaw and a quiet retreat to some other corner of the building. The irony was delicious. What really made it satisfying was that I wasn't breaking any rules. Night shift culture allows for stacked breaks. Using the break room wasn't exclusive to them. I wasn't stealing anything that hadn't already been taken from everyone else. I was just participating in the system they'd invented. Funny enough, once they started losing the break room regularly, the sticky notes stopped appearing altogether. Suddenly, they were very interested in checking in about where people planned to rest. They even asked me one night, "Hey, are you planning on using the break room tonight?" I looked at them and said, "Sometimes. It's usually good to talk about it ahead of time, right?" They nodded, sheepish. Lesson learned. Now things run smoothly again. We rotate spaces, we communicate. Nobody has to sleep in a supply closet anymore. And me, I still come in early, sometimes even when they're not on shift. Old habits die hard. But every once in a while, when I see a sticky note in the supply drawer, I smile to myself because I know exactly how powerful a tiny square of paper can be when used with just the right amount of spite. And yes, I still sleep very, very well. And our last story. After trying to extort $120,000, Contractor was ordered to pay us $115,000 and lost his company. About 2 years ago, my family packed up our lives and moved to another state. The short version is that my mom decided to relocate her private company, and at the same time, the schools where we live took a sharp nosedive in quality. It wasn't an easy move, but it felt necessary. While my parents figured out long-term plans, we rented a small house and started preparing to build a new one about 15 minutes away. The idea was simple enough: build from the ground up, take our time, and end up with something solid that would last. My parents were told the construction would take about a year and a half before the house was livable. Stressful, sure, but manageable. That was before we met Hank. Hank owned a tiny company that did a bit of everything: selling and installing home appliances, painting houses, applying waterproof coatings, that sort of thing. He wasn't a big-name contractor, but his prices were lower than most, and his online reviews looked decent enough. My parents were on a tight budget after the move, so affordability mattered. They met with Hank, discussed the scope of work, and eventually signed a contract that laid out monthly payments. Hank assured them repeatedly that once everything was finished, the total cost would land somewhere around $80,000. Not cheap, but within reach. Against their better instincts, they signed. Almost immediately, things started going sideways. About a week before the contract was finalized, Hank sent a couple of his guys out to look at the lot. They took measurements, eyeballed the size, and supposedly calculated how much paint and waterproofing would be needed. They reported back that everything looked fine. 3 days after the contract was signed, Hank called my parents, sounding far too cheerful, He then told them there had been a small mistake. According to him, the lot was almost twice as large as he'd been told, and because of that, he'd need to add an extra $20,000 to the bill. My parents didn't even know what to say at first. My dad finally asked, "Why didn't you come look at it yourself before we signed?" My mom followed up with, "Why wasn't this mentioned at any point before today?" Hank laughed. Actually laughed. Then he said something along the lines of, "These things happen," and hung up on them. That was the moment my parents realized they were dealing with someone slippery, but since a contract had been signed, they decided to wait and see if this was a one-time stunt. It wasn't. About a month later, we got a call from the actual construction contractors. They told us they'd need to charge an extra $5,000 to bring in heavy machinery to remove quartz underneath our lot so they could dig the basement. My parents were completely blindsided. They'd already had the lot examined by their architect and the contractors themselves, specifically to check for rock or quartz. Nothing had been found. My mom explained this to the contractor on the phone, who sounded just as confused as she was. After a bit of back and forth, my mom asked, "Who told you there was quartz under our lot?" The contractor replied, "Your architect called us earlier. His name was Hank." Hank was not our architect. My mom hung up, furious, and immediately called Hank. Before she could even get a word in, he launched into a dramatic speech about how the quartz under the lot would delay construction by 3 years, and how, because of that delay, my parents now owed him $100,000 for violation of expected completion time. Expected completion time on a contract for appliances, paint, and waterproof coatings. My mom didn't argue, she didn't yell. She just hung up. That's the smartest move she could have made. Arguing would have just fed his drama. Hanging up was a silent declaration that his theater had no audience. It marked the moment they stopped trying to reason with a con artist and started building a legal case. The quiet click was louder than any shout. From that point on, everything became documentation. Calls were recorded, emails were saved, contracts were reviewed line by line. My parents hired 3 different lawyers to make sure nothing slipped through the cracks. By the time it went to court, Hank had tried to tack an extra $120,000 onto an $80,000 contract, all based on things that either didn't exist or had nothing to do with the agreement. The court case itself was long, expensive, and exhausting. But the judge didn't need much time to see what was happening. Hank had violated his own contract repeatedly and had tried to strong-arm my parents into paying money he had no legal right to demand. When Hank's lawyer argued that his company was struggling and close to bankruptcy, the judge didn't even blink. "You should have thought of a smarter way to steal money from people," the judge said flatly. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud. The ruling was brutal and entirely deserved. Hank was ordered to pay my parents $100,000 for violating a financial contract over $50,000, plus an additional $15,000 for impersonating an architect and deliberately attempting to sabotage the construction of the house. Construction resumed almost immediately after the ruling, without any mysterious courts or surprise delays. About a month later, Hank's company filed for bankruptcy. Last I heard, he'd started a cabinet business. He posts his sales numbers online like he's proud of them. They're not good. I don't feel bad. Watching someone try to scam their way out of failure and instead get steamrolled by their own greed is strangely satisfying. My parents got their house built, Hank got exactly what he earned, and every time I drive past that place, I can't help but smile knowing he tried to steal from the wrong people. All 3 stories are about choosing integrity over easy gain. The farm story is a profound clash between legacy and ledger. The sticky note revenge is a petty but perfect display of mirroring bad behavior. But story 3 wins for its legal and financial finality. The contractor didn't just fail, he was held legally and financially accountable, forced to pay more than he tried to steal, and lost everything. It's the ultimate lesson that greed backed by fraud collapses under the weight of its own lies. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.